As Canada faces trade tariffs and economic uncertainty, the question is, why does the United States see Canada as a security threat? Well, my question to you is, are we seeing only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Canada's security issues?
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
Here today to help us understand the state of security when it comes to Canada is our friend Scott McGregor. He's been on our program several times. He's an intelligence analyst. He's worked with the Armed Forces of Canada and also with the RCMP. He's the co-author of the book, The Mosaic Effect, How the Chinese Communist Party has Started a Hybrid War in America's Backyard. A warm welcome, Scott.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Well, Scott, I'm glad that you could join us, and a warm welcome to you. And speaking of welcoming, I'd like to welcome our larger audience as we're now on Merit TV Canada from coast to coast in Canada. So a welcome to you. So, Scott, last time we talked a lot about the security issues in Canada, and not as all as we may think it is. Canadians like to think of ourselves as a very safe and secure country, and that's really only half true. And I want to set the stage here because I very much appreciated reading your book, The Mosaic Effect, and it's quite an analysis about security in Canada. It talks about how the Chinese Communist Party has really started a hybrid war in America's backyard, and it's related to really a complex network of security issues in this country. And it's frankly an eye-opening analysis. That would be the understatement of the day today, Scott. But I want to just focus on briefly the title of the book because it's very intriguing because it references America's backyard. That means you meant Canada. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah.
So we're talking about Canada being a place of vulnerability when it comes to major security issues, because you also use the phrase unrestricted warfare throughout the book. So, what do we mean by unrestricted warfare?
The term unrestricted warfare was actually kind of uncovered by two Chinese colonels in the People's Liberation Army Air Force when they wrote a document describing how the Chinese wanted to conduct short of hostility type of conflict. So waging war. The Chinese believe that the Cold War never ended, and as such have conducted different types of operations globally. Um, Canada is a focal point, mainly because of our access to the United States. Um, but in hybrid warfare, there's really, I'm going to say, three main things. So you have sharp power, which focuses on the political influence and
Mhm.
leveraging. Soft power, which is the economic subversion of a nation state, and then transnational organized crime. These things all work in concert with one another, and that's what we've been seeing in Canada for over 30 years, as the book documents and likes to explain exactly how they do it. Gets into quite some detail there, but that's the main focus. And so what's happening with the United States right now is of utmost importance, and it directly relates to
All right. So, the book is a fascinating one. I certainly recommend it to people to read because it does give us an eye opening analysis regarding really unrestricted warfare. You could refer to it as also full spectrum warfare, where it's not about a kinetic war, a hot war, but there's parties that are using really every part of the playbook to really look at undermining the West and certainly undermining the United States. And I know this sounds kind of almost frankly bizarre or out of a spy novel, but you go through the evidence very carefully from, well, the use of terrorism to economic warfare to network warfare, or even in the age of the internet, information warfare, lawfare, as well as even media warfare. So you summarize this quite convincingly, Scott. And so my question to you is, do you think a lot of Canadians, including the media and many politicians, are really missing the whole point of concerns from the Trump administration that Canada has a major security problem?
Right now, I think Canadians are more concerned about being offended than understanding what the tweet from Trump was regarding the tariffs. If you've actually read the executive order, and I highly recommend people do, that is discussing mainly DTOs, so drug trafficking organizations.
Hmm.
Those things fall under transnational organized crime. That's something that has been escalating in Canada and propagating throughout society for since I'm going to say 1997, when we see the fall of Hong Kong, or sorry, the changeover of Hong Kong to the Chinese. There's a long history of how this occurs, moving from the triads and when they begin working with the Chinese government. And this is mainly focused on the Chinese aspect. We also have the largest Iranian diaspora post-Shah in the world living in Vancouver. Um, and we have IRGC, Quds Force, Hezbollah, all associated to those things. These people work together both at the nation state level, the non-state actor level,
Hmm.
and then they work with local host nation gangs. Um, because Vancouver is a port and because in British Columbia, law enforcement officers cannot charge an individual. They can recommend charges to Crown, but we've seen where that's gone in a number of different operations here. That's one of the biggest issues. It's a soft landing point, and you're able to conduct these type of operations in Canada. The Trump administration has known about this. Information that I have shared, and when I was in government, has reached the Pentagon through different networks that I worked with. So they've been aware of what's going on in Canada. As a matter of fact, I would say they know more about what's going on in Canada than our own agency.
Okay, just hold on for a sec. So you're saying that in many respects, the United States has been watching this security issue unfold for years now. And you, in your proposition, would be that in many respects they know more about these issues in our own backyard than well we do. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. There's a number of instances you can look at. I would even uh, look directly to the head of RCMP intelligence when he was charged and convicted, and who he was working with. So he was working with the cartels, the Iranians, and the Chinese. The Americans knew about this. It relates to a larger file, and that's how that information came out. This
No,
isn't.
just
It's a
hold
lot
on
of
for a
these.
sec there. I don't want people to miss that. So you're
Okay.
citing a very famous case. This is almost like the so-called Kim Philby case, where in MI5 years ago there was a high-level spy in charge of security that was told to investigate possible double agents from the Kremlin. And ironically, Kim Philby himself was the double agent who ended up betraying much of Western security. And we had basically our Kim Philby moment just a few years ago with the conviction of a senior director within the RCMP in charge of security. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that is the case that I'm referring to. The connections there are quite significant. They've never really been, un, released by the government, of course, because of the investigation, etc. Um, and there's still an appeal in place by Cameron Ordis at this time. So it's still kind of before the courts, even
Mhm.
though some of this information has come out. Canada has a hard time accepting that this has been going on, and we haven't managed to do anything about it. We've had some major cases; all of them have failed. They've
Mm.
either had state proceedings, or um, a lot of the time people flee the country. So there's a lot been going on in Canada at the highest level of transnational organized crime in the world. Um, the cartels have had headquarters in Canada. Um, we see the work between nation states and transnational organized crime. So we have state-sponsored activity here. This is stuff that's been reported on in the media to a certain extent. Unfortunately, it took one tweet from a new president to suddenly get people to act. Our government knee-jerk reacted and heard borders and decided that that's what this was all about. Then they knee-jerk reacted about fentanyl. That is not the case. Those are symptoms of a larger problem.
Mm.
Problem
Mhm.
is transnational organized crime working with nation states that are undermining Canada, which is impacting American national security.
Okay. So that's the punchline is that fentanyl, all these other things, border crossings are symptoms of a deeper issue where there's a lot of bad guys hanging out in Canada. It's a safe place that goes right into the underbelly of the United States. And the Americans see this as a massive security problem. That's what we're missing here. That's the headline, is it not, Scott?
That is the headline, and I would take it a few steps further than that. Even um, we've seen in the media all the reporting about the connectivity between some of these the China influence operations, etc., and political entities. That is extremely concerning, especially to the United States, because now these people are able to influence and leverage um, economic subversion, which is looking at critical infrastructure. We know that
Mhm.
China has been attacking government agencies in Canada to the tune of more than 3,000 times per minute. So Canada is constantly under attack by China, um, and they're identified as a threat nation. People are talking about doing business with China, while the United States is trying to decouple from China.
Mhm.
The main theme here is something called continentalism. The way the world is going right now, the United States sees that we need to shore up, uh, what's going on in North America, so Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and with threats on both sides of it, emanating from within, and with both of those governments not doing enough to stop those threats to China.
Mhm.
I believe there was just a Chinese Canadian that was arrested in the United States for spying. So he's looking with drone or the using drones and some other information to surveil military bases. So there's constantly a Canadian connection in these kind of activities. We
Mhm.
have an undefended border. Um, we do not have the resources on our border to understand exactly what happens there. Um, and sure enough, shoring that up will help, but it's not going to stop everything that's going on. A lot of this stuff
Mhm.
happens through maritime routes. Um, I mean, the fentanyl stuff that we just saw, and I'm not sure if you want to talk about that, but the largest fentanyl lab in the world was found in British Columbia. And if people
Wow.
think that that narcotic, which I think there was, I can't even remember, over 20 million, or
Mhm.
was it 80 million? Pardon me, 80 million doses of enough to kill a person. So it could kill 80 million people
Mhm.
um, in that one bust. Where do they think that's going?
Mhm.
Because Canadians, there's not that many of us. So consuming that much product, no, I'm sorry, that's not how this works. So,
Exactly.
and then if we want to look at intent, a lot of different analysts have identified the fact that fentanyl and synthetic narcotics is one of the means China's been utilizing to impact North America, to undermine the safeguards that we have in place. When you take away a source country, so cocaine from Colombia, for instance, now this stuff, you don't have to import it. You don't have to do that. It's
Mm.
already
Mhm.
built right here. It's created and manufactured right in good old Canada, which everybody believes is so safe and good.
Mhm.
Uh, and they don't recognize things going out. A lot of people think about customs and borders. We're trying to stop stuff coming into Canada.
Mhm.
We're not really stopping stuff from leaving Canada.
Mhm.
That's another concern that relates to the transnational organized crime piece.
All right. So you're really, frankly, challenging not just Canadians, but decision makers to wake up out of our slumber and realize no, there's a deeper story here. There's a bigger picture where security issues matter, not only to, they should matter to Canadians, but they matter to Americans because the whole issue of fentanyl deaths is a very primary concern on the political scene in the United States. And it seems like we've kind of missed this message, certainly in our media, that this issue matters to politicians in the United States. And with a new administration, they're going to ensure that there is security, full stop. Is that correct?
Yes, that is definitely correct. The United States has had enough. They've tried to convince Canada to do something about it and have been unsuccessful. Um, some of the stuff has been out for a while. You look at what was happening with the casinos. They're talking about drug money moving into the casinos
Mm-hmm.
and then being laundered, and the proceeds from that going to the government. Um, that's pretty scary. So, fentanyl deaths were on the hands of people that were facilitating that and allowing it to happen. Um, we had an inquiry into it, and it was uncovered that yes, this type of activity is occurring. Yet here we are. We don't really see anything happening about, like, to impact it, to try to mitigate it. Instead, we see things carrying on, and now people are standing up and saying, "Yeah, America, what are you saying? We're not doing that."
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've already proven that it's happening. We know that it's happening. The Five Eyes partners know that it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
The Cameron Ortis debacle that has impacted our information sharing with the Five Eyes. Our trust level's gone completely out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now with the pushback from government on against the United States, as opposed to trying to work something out where we could try to combat these things together, instead we're talking about potentially doing more work with China, which is in the wrong direction, and everyone knows it or should know it. It's
Mm-hmm.
the sentiment in Canada has changed immensely. Awareness around what China's been doing to Canada is everywhere. There's a number of academic reports on these types of things. Hybrid warfare is the center of those things. Um, the lawfare that's occurring, the economic subversion that's occurring, they're in every single aspect of our critical infrastructure, um, from our grassroots politics to our finances. All we have to do is look at the TD Bank, the largest fine ever given to a financial institution in the world. $3 billion, over 3 billion, $3.09 billion. Um, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The Americans are aware of other institutions and other cases that they will bring forward, because this has been going on for far too long. The Americans have also raised the fact that, hey, Canada, why don't you have any U.S. banks here? Aren't we neighbors? Aren't we friends? We have Canadian banks in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So there's concern around a lot of these issues, on the American side, and unfortunately, all we've gotten is we're Canadians. We don't like what you're saying. You
Mm-hmm.
insulted us with your 51st state comment, which,
Mm-hmm.
don't get me wrong, I think that's an off-color statement to make, as a
Sure.
Canadian, but I consider the source. I'm nonpartisan. I don't care which party's in power. I just
Mm-hmm.
want fairness. I want the people represented. Um, and without the situational awareness of what's going on in our own country, listening to politicians or anyone else speak about things, um, that they don't really have the understanding or comprehension around is a little bit insulting, considering I've been trying to raise awareness for over 10 years.
Yeah, well, we certainly have been talking about this, certainly about the last 2 years, is that security does ultimately trump trade, pardon the pun here, but security issues do matter to the United States, and they should matter to Canadians. And so it's in this context that you certainly are going to brief us on the file about security issues in Canada today. So we'll go through this, and it is interesting because the response by many Canadians is understandably almost they're horrified that our quote friend and ally, the United States, would be picking on us and threatening us with tariffs. And this whole 51st state comment was interesting because some 82% of Canadians now, according to a recent poll by Leger, says that people are upset about that, and rightly so. But within this context, though, it behooves us to understand what are the facts and the issues here if we care about this country. So let's dive into this. So we're not going to miss the story today. We have Scott McGregor, an intelligence analyst, talking to us about the real story about Canada. And I think the story goes back quite a long ways. In fact, 30 years ago, when you referenced before that this has been going on for some time, called Operation Dragonlord. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, certainly. So Operation Dragonlord was a U.S. Department of Justice operation that involved multiple agencies, the NSA, FBI, etc., and it identified Canada as a national security threat to the United States because of what was happening with its relationship with China and the triads, etc. Um, that coincides within, I think, 6 months to a year with another report that was declassified called the Sidewinder Report. And that was written by a man named Michelle Juno Katsuya,
Hmm.
who has come out and explained that yes, Operation Dragon Lord was something that followed that document and that operation. And he explained that yes, these are the facts that the Americans were very concerned about what was going on here, and the especially the political aspects of China influencing our politics and getting involved and leveraging some of the politicians. I believe Michelle Juno Katsuya has come out and said that every prime minister, uh, I can't remember exactly the quote, shoot, is has been corrupted, um, and that's a bold statement to make. Um, you know, I don't ever speak really to the specifics of those types of things because on the intelligence side, we look in probabilities and we say, it's highly likely that this is what's occurring. And I don't like to be extremely definitive uh, without having all of the evidence available. And
Hmm.
so those reports are official documents that identify people and places and things that have been going on. Uh, and that's the concern really is
Hmm.
the Americans have known about this for that long, and so that's something that hasn't had anybody respond to until
Hmm.
now. People haven't even really cared. We had
Hmm.
9/11 occur, and everything got trumped by counterterrorism. Well,
Hmm.
counterterrorism is not what's happening. It wasn't the biggest concern. There's some China experts like Nicholas F. former CIA um, agent. He has tried to bring this to the United States for many years as well, and had the same issue. It's only been really addressed in the last few months that the United States has really take. I mean, they've been interested and
Hmm.
they've talked about decoupling, etc. But right now we're seeing a real push towards trying to make things better in the United States, better for her allies, and then again with the continentalism piece, trying to shore up North America against the threats that are facing it: Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, all of those things. Um, we can talk about Russia and Ukraine if you'd like as well.
Hmm.
Um, there's some concerns around what's happening there and how that relates
Hmm.
to Canada.
But to be clear, this story about Canada being a quote national security threat, as viewed by the Americans, really matters to us because if we look at the current state of affairs, that would be a surprise, I think, to almost all Canadians that in fact this has been bubbling now on the stove for a long time, and that now this puts in jeopardy our economic relationship because security issues are so concerning. So, if we look at today's context, is there something in particular that um, precipitated the emergence of the security issue being named, or is it just simply a clever negotiation tactic by the new president?
I think there's a combination of things. I think when we see 200 executive orders signed within a week or two, um, there's a lot going on and a lot that needs to be affected. It's difficult to get anything accomplished if every time you try to do something, it's met with resistance, both legal, social, etc. So this push by the Trump administration forces everyone to thin out and try to identify how they want to combat it or counter it, or
Hmm.
what's in their interest. I would say that from what I've seen so far, most of the things fit with what you would expect a country that has a death by a thousand cuts going on. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
People have been in bed with China in the United States and Canada for a long, long time. We've watched TV shows, the Shark Tank, and all those kinds of shows, saying, "Hey, bring me your stuff, and we'll offshore it to China for manufacturing."
Hmm.
And and now the realization is, well, that wasn't such a great idea because the Chinese don't respect intellectual property rights, a
Hmm.
number of different things. So here we see the theft of those things, and we're finding people's innovations being sold in different markets around the world. Um, so those things are coming full circle now, and people suddenly want to do something about it, especially in the United States. Is what we're seeing is that people are upset about these
Hmm.
things. They want
Hmm.
to make America great again, which is
Yeah.
really just
So,
we don't want to sell
but
ourselves.
exactly. But in that context, you see the American political will weighing in and saying to Canada, we need you to get your security house in order. We are going to consolidate our security issues and military strategy across the continent from Greenland to Panama. We're not going to tolerate weak borders and this kind of endless fentanyl trafficking and lax security. And this is going to be a situation where we're not going to tolerate as well a NATO freeloader named Canada. So this is really kind of all related. And if Canada, you can't understand this message, we're willing to put massive tariffs on your economic side so that you don't enjoy access to a quote premium economic market. That's kind of like a balance sheet approach to looking at the relationship here and saying, are you going to be truly an ally and a friend, or somebody who lets in our enemies in our backyard?
I would say that's pretty accurate, um, considering Canada has been allowing that to happen. No one's saying that the United States hasn't also experienced some of these things, but the United States is taking measures and steps to try to remedy those things now, and they're expecting their closest allies, the ones that border them, to do the same.
Mm, okay. So,
And
but this is a an interesting question then, because I think many Canadians are insulted by the notion that somehow we're compared to the nation of Mexico in terms of security issues. I mean, you had in effect a open border between Canada, sorry, pardon me, Mexico and the United States. Surely we can't be compared as the same type of country as Mexico.
well, that's an interesting way to look at it. Mexico has their issues. They have corruption. A lot of
Hmm.
it is overt, so you know that there's corruption. Um, last I looked, there was over 126 different cartels, and they all do their own thing. And is there violence? Certainly there is. Um, is it related to narcotics, human smuggling, all those things? Certainly. We have all that in Canada in spades. Um, and we have the highest level bad guys operating here. So it's it's a different country um, that I would say isn't as good at hiding or covering up or operating covertly.
Hmm.
In the United States, they're experiencing a lot of illegal migrants crossing the border. In Canada, right? So the migrants that get into Mexico come from El Salvador, Guatemala, all these places. They can drive or walk there. Nobody's driving or walking to Canada. These
Hmm.
people are flying in from countries. The terrorism things that we see, the terrorist supporters that we see, these people have to fly in here, which means they have to go through customs, they have to go through all these different means. And when those agencies are either hamstrung because of weak legislation, or they don't have the capacity to deal with a lot of those things, that's where we have issues. I'll give you a for instance. Trying to deport someone to Iran for transnational organized crime doesn't happen in Canada. because Iran will not provide the travel papers to allow them to come back to
Mhm.
Iran. That's an issue. That means we've got bad guys running around. Then we look at our justice system and what happens to people that get involved with these things. Nothing really happens.
Mhm.
So Canada is saturated with this type of thing. Some of the criminal intelligence analysts that I've spoken to, when they would look at something, they'd say, they thought it was, you know, here and there, and there were networks and all that. And what they found is that all of these networks are connected. Every time they look, the same people come up. One of the issues we have as well within law enforcement is that all information 7 years and older must be destroyed. Well, from an intelligence perspective, that's your historical trend information. So
Mhm.
now you're reinvestigating people that have been doing things for 30 years, and you have to start all over again. Just to understand it,
S-
just to
Sorry,
comprehend it.
there's a rule that you have to destroy that after 7 years. That kind of evidence.
Yeah, that's a privacy issue. So that's that's another thing that, when we talk about legal reform, police reform, and that
Hmm.
kind of thing, some of these things are problematic for law enforcement. Law enforcement isn't the problem. These guys all want to go out there and get bad guys. They
Hmm.
do. They're just constrained, whether it's capabilities, knowledge. We don't have subject matter experts on money laundering. So when we try to
Hmm.
prosecute money laundering cases, we
Hmm.
have 10 billion freaking AML people running around. And all they do is get the checks in the boxes for the companies and organizations that require it
Oh,
by law for compliance and regulatory means.
okay. So there's a bigger picture in terms of what's going on in Canada. We've got the who's who of the criminal underworld across the world in Canada. Period. And they see it. They're here because we're seen as a safe haven, so they can do their business. And the United States knows this. And our senior intelligence and police community know this as well, Scott. I mean, you know the file well, among others. And we're missing some obvious tools. In the United States, we know that one of the ingenious ways that the mafia was brought down years ago with Giuliani and the former mayor of New York was the introduction of RICO legislation, basically looking at how these cartels work and bringing them down as a group. We don't have that in Canada, do we?
No, we do not.
So how do we get the bad guys on this kind of scale? Like if you've got literally networks of these groups, and I know that I listened to the senior RCMP report in front of a House committee just a few weeks ago, confirming there's some 4,000 criminal gangs involved in fentanyl trafficking. That's a lot of gangs. I assume a gang is more than a handful of people. So this is a lot of people involved in the export of drugs. And then you've got story after story coming in now about this. So what's going on in this country if we don't have the legal tools to go after the bad guys? So that's part of the problem, right, Scott?
That is a major part of the issue, yes. It's why you see sometimes in the RCMP when senior officials will say, we can't bite off more than we can chew. And that's because not just capacity, but there's laws in place in Canada that benefit the perpetrator,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes it very difficult to get past. There's a timeline that is established, and when we get into the forensics of all these things, digital forensics, etc., um, when things are handwritten in Chinese characters and there's 2 terabytes of it, who's going to decipher what that means and how long does that take? So the timeline starts. You've got 2 years to prosecute. So that stuff gets delayed. Lawfare is used by the higher level individuals that are conducting hybrid warfare. And the lawfare piece is they have the best lawyers in the country working for them because they have
Mm,
all the money in the world to do that. So it
right.
gets very difficult um, for the justice system and for law enforcement to achieve enforcement. And we look at it on a continuum of detect. So you've detected the crime.
Mm-hmm.
You want to deter the crime so that you can try to stop them. Well, we don't have the laws to do that. And disrupt it. Well, who's going to authorize disruption? Because police are supposed to enforce the law. And the last piece is interdiction or enforcement. A
Hmm.
lot of people go directly to the enforcement piece because, again, law enforcement also needs to maintain public confidence. The people need to believe that the police can protect them. And what we've seen is that people are losing that confidence, which is a shame because, we have some of the highest trained people, in the world doing the law enforcement piece for us. And they do a great job. They identify all these things. Either political will stops it and, you know, or the legislation. So we're constricted. We've had some changes recently, even in British Columbia, where we have reverse onus type law, which they have in Australia. I am not seeing that coming out in the media saying, look what we found. Here's somebody that is a student that owns a $15 million house. Um, where did you get the money from? Uh,
So
we're not
can you
we're not
explain
seeing that
that
yet.
where there's a situation where there's an obvious question in front of us saying, how does a student, in quotes, afford a mansion in Vancouver as an example? Is that what you're getting at?
That is an example, and I can tell you how it happens. Um, the way that our laws work is that when a foreign student comes over, they're entitled to have a guardian come with them. Okay, well, now that they're here, they need a place to live, so now they can bring money in. In China, it's illegal, or you need special permission to take more than 50,000 US dollars out of the country. So when someone buys a $15 million house in cash, that goes into
Hmm.
a lawyer's trust account, and the lawyer is not required to report it to FinTrack, that's a problem. Now those people have to drive around and get to school or whatever. Well, let's buy a Lamborghini. So that's why you see
Hmm.
someone with a new driver symbol on their vehicle, and it's $1 million car.
Hmm.
It the money comes legally in a lot of ways because we allow it.
Hmm.
Now we're starting to see educational institutions being scrutinized. We've seen a lot of things where an awareness and the sentiment changes, where
Hmm.
Canadians are like, "Hey, this isn't right." Like how is this possible? Oh,
Hmm.
we're struggling. We can't afford this stuff. We work hard every day. We make good money, and
Hmm.
none of us can do these things. How is
Hmm.
it possible?
Exactly. So asking the basic commonsensical question, what is really going on here in front of our eyes? Because there's, as you said, so many symptoms of this criminal activity. Now it is interesting. I have certainly seen a lot of scurrying about, as you have, Scott, in terms of elected officials trying to send a signal to the United States now that we're on the road to Damascus and we've seen the light and we're going to wake up and take these security questions seriously. You even had the appointment of a quote fentanyl czar. Recently, that was announced, and a number of people, including the Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith, has said, I am greatly heartened to see that the U.S. President Trump and the Canadian government have agreed to crack down on fentanyl trafficking and other illegal activities. And of course, there's some positive hope there in terms of diplomacy at work and the ability to work together as a team. But the point is that this has been going on for years. So are you hopeful that Canada is now rising to the challenge and that, in fact, this border czar will actually make a difference?
Well, that's a tricky question. Um, I believe that Canada is more appeasing right now because they're saying one thing and then doing another,
Mm.
and that's difficult to understand for the average person. Um, the person that's appointed as the fentanyl czar is more of a bureaucrat. They work in Ottawa, uh, and they're in the PCO, uh, the Privy Council office, and they're working with uh, the Trudeau government, and we've seen a lot of issues with what's been happening. So it's hard to say that it's going to be mitigated. I think there will be efforts made, obviously, to appease the U.S. But the underlying statement is, if you're going to put tariffs on us, then we're going to do something to you. And this is kind of schoolyard tactics, which the United States has a lot more experience at and has a lot more capability with than we do. Um, I mentioned the intelligence piece. In Canada, if the United States decides that um, they don't want Canada in the Five Eyes anymore, that means they don't get any of that information. They are cut off. So, satellite imagery, all of these things that Canada enjoys as being part of the Five Eyes is removed.
Okay, so and
While
just to
being a
clarify, the
NATO,
Five Eyes Agreement is this seminal foundational intelligence sharing agreement, alliance, if you will, between the United States, Britain, and of course, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. That's the Five Eyes. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yes, yes. So the Five Eyes um, is a strong alliance. There was a time when New Zealand was actually ousted for something similar to what's happening in Canada. So Canada is experiencing these things, and there's been a number of issues that the United States has raised. I mean, the Cameron
Interesting.
Norris one is immense. The, the information that was being handled at that level, um, we can't underestimate exactly what the impacts were to the United States from that. Uh, so they've been watching this happen, and their agencies follow these networks and understand what they're doing in Canada. They
Hmm.
understand the financial institutions that they're running their money through. They understand how they're moving narcotics. They understand all of these things. Canada is importing precursors by the megatons, and we don't see anything in the news about that being stopped. As a
Hmm.
matter of fact, I don't even know if you've heard anything about it being illegal.
Hmm.
Um, and when you have those narcotics, you need to put them into pills because fake oxys are usually what fentanyl gets made into. There's other things,
Hmm.
but uh, so pill presses. The pill presses you would think would be regulated. No, and this has been brought up over the years.
Hmm.
So anybody can go and buy a pill press and start making this stuff. It, the,
Okay, so this is almost farcical. If we look at the bigger picture, then we see in plain sight some stunning revelations of what's going on in this country in terms of basic security issues. And we know, like you, Scott, a long list of them. And I want to just highlight a couple of them with your kind help. One would be the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. Had major problems when it came to security issues, including we had Chinese nationals work at the lab and also get into major problems. There's quite a report that was tabled regarding the lab. I did have the occasion to read it, and it's a powerful indictment that we don't have proper security controls on a national level for lab. This is obvious to everyone that we've got a major security problem. Is that correct, Scott?
I would say in that instance, definitely allowing a Chinese military scientist to work in one of our national labs. That's pretty concerning. Um, and I'm not sure, I'm not trying to place blame anywhere because I don't understand exactly how that happened. The vetting process, etc., you would expect to be pretty
Hmm.
rigid, right? It's pretty rigorous. And
Indeed.
yet here we are. And I know that the woman's husband was said to be a scientist as well, but from people I've spoken to that were there, they didn't know anything about what was going on. And then we had concerns with uh, the transfer of some of this material between Canada and China. But we
Indeed.
also saw it
Yes.
with the United States and Canada. And the United States arrested several individuals that were involved in that. So when it comes to investigating those individuals, the fact that they were allowed to leave and we didn't get to find out anything, they just got to leave the country. The head of that lab uh, resigned and went and worked in the UK. So there's a
So
lot of
yeah.
the government has never really come out and shared the information to set the record straight.
Hmm.
Whether there were mistakes made and just accept, the fact that
Hmm.
yeah, we messed up and here's what we're doing about
Hmm.
it. A lot of Canadians are sitting there wondering what's going on and why it happened,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of concern around it, considering what
There
COVID
it is.
did to the world.
See, and another powerful example, I think, is just the state of our ports of entry, and particularly marine ports, where it appears that less than 1% of the millions of containers that come into this country are even inspected. And we know that the performance of our ports, including the Port of Vancouver, is at the bottom of ports in terms of their performance internationally. But again, that's all related to common knowledge that many of again, the usual criminal suspects really play a major role in the operation of those ports. So those ports are really seen or appear to be compromised in many levels. So am I being too cynical about that? I mean, clearly there's a lot of work to do to clean up our ports.
Yeah, the ports are definitely a concern. There's been open source reporting on what's been happening at the ports, not just in Vancouver, but other locations as well. And the organizations, the criminal organizations that have been associated to that, that's part of it. I would say that there's potentially some internal things that need to be looked at. Um, One of the things to take into consideration is most Canadians think of container ships, etc., kind of in the old sense. And what we have now is super tankers. And those are almost 100 times larger. They carry that much more. And there's only a few places on the west coast of North America where they can actually make deliveries. Uh, so that is Vancouver and Prince Rupert.
Mm.
So those are two areas that I know law enforcement. I've made law enforcement aware, um, as well as some other individuals have also spoken to it. Uh, those are very, very concerning because of the fact that, well, those ports, you have to look at who owns them, because a lot of people probably think Canada owns them, and that would be incorrect. Um, and so when that happens, there's concerns because what everyone wants to do is meet the compliance and regulatory requirements that the government sets forth.
Hmm.
Okay, but what about the activity? What about the vetting and the enhanced due diligence to find out, who owns these things, who's bringing what in? That's a whole other piece. When it comes to
Hmm.
searching, um, when they're searching, like you said, 1%. I always went with 2%, but the majority of that was for nuclear, biological, and chemical. That's what they're looking
Hmm.
for. They're not looking for narcotics. Most of that stuff, um, someone made someone aware. Because if you've ever seen what it takes to search a ship, um, it's insane. When you look at a manifest, um, with the cyber capabilities of the people that are involved, making a sea container disappear is not as difficult as one might imagine.
Mm.
Um,
Okay. So if we had to sum up, then we have a lot of work to do in Canada to get our security house in order. We've just gone through some of the basics, and it's pretty far-reaching, from our own intelligence community and breaches there to lax laws to all kinds of issues with our ports, to just simply name a few. So, in this context, how do we move forward in this situation? And before we talk about that roadmap, if you will, from a policy perspective, I want to ask you the question: if senior members of our intelligence community are aware of these issues, why is it that our elected officials seem to be asleep at the wheel here? Is that what's going on here?
oh, you're putting me on the spot. The Prime Minister stated that you had to take intelligence reports with a grain of salt, and that there may be concerns around whether the information that's provided is completely factual. Uh, that is very telling. When the people that are trying to protect the country by identifying threats to it using all of the techniques and practices that are accepted by all of the Five Eyes NATO partners, um, and we don't see other countries questioning that. Um, it makes you wonder why. Why would you question the people that are trying to protect Canada as best they can? Um, they don't have a mandate to for self-preservation or anything like that. They're trying to do what's best for the country. That's what happens when you sign on the dotted line. You're here to protect
Hmm.
Canadians and provide advice to the government so they can make decisions. If they choose to make decisions, then they have to accept responsibility that either the information that was provided they ignored and they thought that that wasn't helpful and they had a better solution, because they're the ones that are going to choose how they deal with it. Decision makers get to make those choices. Intelligence people just provide the information and say, I hope you take this and do what you should with it so you can mitigate the threats that are occurring in the country. I wouldn't say that um, everyone in the intelligence world understands the complexities of hybrid war. A lot of people operate on the basis of what the mandate is at the time. So, conventional warfare, the military focuses mainly on conventional warfare. Law enforcement mainly focuses on the criminal activity. Um, when we look at someone like CSIS was focused on counterterrorism, domestic counterterrorism, because they're not an international intelligence agency, they're a domestic intelligence agency. So that's where their focuses are.
Hmm.
When you get stovepipe like that and you don't have dialogue at a level where you can get all of that information and work with your partners on it, um, it's difficult to move the dial. I would
Hmm.
say in the last, however, 5 years, that dial has been moved, and there is awareness around it, but not significant enough to understand what's happening on the private sector side and how it impacts the public sector side.
Hmm.
I'll give you, for
Hmm.
instance, in the RCMP, you have two different types of information. You have law enforcement sensitive information, which is protected, and then kind of have access to classified information. Those two worlds don't really cross over. So when you're in a file, you want to protect the integrity of the file. They're doing what they need to do to prosecute and not have any hiccups, not have any contamination. Make sure that it goes to trial so that the defendant can't just get away with it. That is difficult when your intelligence people are embedded in the investigation. They're no longer doing intelligence. They're collecting evidence. That's an investigative function.
Hmm.
And it's difficult to understand the difference. And I'm trying to explain it pretty simply, but you can't look at everything that's going on and then apply it to the case that you're in. And that's why they have difficulty. Now, we see that in all of these agencies that are working in Canada. In the United States, in 2011, President Barack Obama created an executive order that identified transnational organized crime as a national security threat. Trump has just done basically the same thing with the cartels, stating that drug cartels are terrorists, which is true because we're talking about transnational narco
Hmm.
terrorism, which is something I worked on back in 2010 in the Middle East. So now we see that the same type of information is passed. In Canada, there is no strategy on transnational organized crime. It's the only
Mm.
country in the Five Eyes that doesn't have that. In Canada, classified information cannot be shared with law enforcement to affect arrests, etc. In the United States, it can because they backstop it. They protect the people and the sources of that information. In Canada, that's what people get away with. When it goes to court, they say, oh, I want to call the witness of the source. And they go, well, we can't do that. They could get killed. Well, then the case is thrown out.
Mm.
So that's
Mhm.
some of the issues, just in a nutshell, like just a really simplified version of how that works. Um, and so without those things, it's difficult to have all the agencies work together to achieve the goals, especially what's being
Mhm.
asked of us by the United States right now.
Mhm.
They're saying, let's create a task force and we'll do it together, which would mean government will have to make legislative changes to affect the enforcement piece. Will that happen? That's difficult to say. I'm not very optimistic about it. I think there's a lot of people that are um, influenced, leveraged, complicit in this country, and they will fight tooth and nail to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay, so you're really putting everything on the table then in this country, saying that we need to get out of the pool, to use that analogy, and we need a top to bottom approach of information sharing across the board, an integrated strategy to get at rooting out this kind of crime in this country. And we look at this matters because our economic futures are at stake. And not only that, you'd think morally we would be all over this if we had leaders in charge that had a kind of a moral hazard recognition of this. They'd say, of course, this matters to everybody, including Canadians' well being and safety, Scott. I mean, it just seems ridiculous that there wouldn't be a sense of urgency and we would have been all over this years ago. So, why is that? Why have we been, frankly, kind of asleep at the wheel?
I think I think there's a number of different reasons. I think what we know now as foreign interference is a major issue, and people have associated that strictly with political will, etc., political
Hmm.
interference. And that's not the only thing that's going on here. Um, Nation states are impacting Canada's ability to do what it needs to um, by controlling the narrative. Whether that means getting into positions of power or authority or influencing those people. Um, and then there's also the fact that our legislation trying to change that is a really big deal.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when you're trying to stay in power, um, you want to appease the people that are going to vote for you. And so those things are what do you want to call them? Constraints, I guess, to making those changes. Right now, we're seeing, well, we have been seeing the largest anti-government sentiment that I can remember. Uh, so that is something that is starting to sway the way people want to vote right now. But at the same time, it's also looking at what's going on in their communities, and they're seeing, you know, these violent acts. People are afraid, like they're afraid to get on the train or the bus. They're having their homes broken into, and the law states they can't do anything about it. And that is very frustrating for Canadians
Hmm.
um, who don't believe that the crime level is that bad. We go, oh, it's not that bad. I don't want to live in the United States. Look what goes on there. They got guns and everything else. Well, the reason those people have guns, everyone, is because of what's happening in Canada. Because eventually you're going to get angry enough that they're going to have to do something about it. And that's what's starting to happen now. People are starting to get upset about, you know,
Hmm.
their own safety, their own well-being. People only started paying attention when it started to hit them in the pocketbook. That is, our food costs too much. I can't find a place to live. My kids will never own a house. How is this possible? There's only 45 million people in Canada. We have
Hmm.
the third largest reserve of oil in the world. We have hydroelectric. We have lumber. We have wheat. We have everything in this country to make it wealthy. And this is what we're complaining about. We have all the land. Why aren't we why aren't we able to build enough houses for our people to live in?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
ridiculous. If you've ever been to the Middle East, there's some pretty small countries that don't have trees, that don't have half of the things that they don't have any water.
Hmm.
And yet all of their citizens are quite well off. Now,
Okay.
how is that possible? Well, we have to start to look inside and start asking these questions.
Mhm.
And I think people are starting to do that. There's people out there that are listening to this podcast
Mhm.
that already know what I'm telling you. They
Mhm.
understand this. This is just common sense logic. I'm not saying
But I,
anything that people don't already know.
but what you're saying, Scott, though, is you're certainly challenging us to look deeper and more critically at the common narrative that there's nothing to see here when it comes to Canadian concerns about security, because they're just simply coming from, the concerns are coming from the United States. So clearly, Canada has a lot of work to do on the security file. And our hope is that obviously the questions coming from our ally and friend, the United States, should be seen as an opportunity to maybe do better, not only when it comes to economic issues like taking down interprovincial barriers among provinces, but also looking at the security of our own country. So, is that where you see hope then, Scott, in terms of these kinds of challenges as an opportunity?
I think that the challenges are definitely an opportunity. I think what has been presented to us is a, a helping hand, um, to
Mm,
force us to do what we need to do to clean up the country. Unfortunately, right now, what we're seeing is kind of this pushback. And I don't think the pushback is going to work the way that most people think it could, um, because the United States, if they were just trying to be negotiating, and maybe that is part of it, they want to negotiate some better deals. But the fact of the matter is, they are concerned. Um, this is a dog that's cornered, that's barking, and they're saying, "Listen, I'm scared right now," and they are, because the threat of China is impacting the entire world,
mm, mhm,
the entire world, and the United States is the target. So they're saying, we need you guys on board. We need you to step up. We need you to do the things that we've been talking about all this time. And if you're not going to do it, we're going to have to do something about it. We don't have a choice. It's not that we don't like Canadians. They love us. They love us. They love Mexico. They love Canada. They love everything that North America offers. They
mhm.
want to make it stronger. They want to make it better. They want to clean it up. And Canada is saying, well, we want to do it on our own terms. And from what we've seen in the past, those terms are not good enough,
All
to
right.
say the least.
Well, this certainly sounds like a seminal moment in Canada's history. Will we hear the call by our friend and ally, the United States, to, well, to get our act together when it comes to not only economic affairs, but security affairs as well. So I want to thank you, Scott, for joining us today, the co author of The Mosaic Effect. And we're very grateful that you could join us for this far reaching conversation.
It's been my pleasure, David, anytime.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.